Hey guys, welcome to this month's Pinterest party. I'm so glad that you're here to join us. I'm going to show you everything you need to know to make your fall truck sign. I'm so excited that we have so many people participating this month, so we're going to go ahead and get started. You should have in your kit all of your paint that you need, as well as four sponges and sandpaper, your set of stencils. All you need from your house is a pair of scissors and some kind of old credit card or gift card or something that you can scrape the stencils down with, okay? Feel free to pause the video at any time, and you can always text me or call me or ask me any questions that you have. If you ever have any issues, of course, just reach out and we'll make it right, okay? One of the things I want to remember about this party is that our goal is not perfection. We are really trying to get that rustic, old look on this sign. So there's going to be several things that might be a little bit imperfect, and that's okay. We want it to look that way, and we're going to work on sanding and distressing and all kinds of things by the very end to give us that feel, so it doesn't look like a brand new sign, okay? So we are actually working on the back of a chalkboard. So I really like doing this. This is something I've done over the years. I like it because we don't have to frame anything. There's no hammering or nails, but you get the look of the framed chalkboard, okay? Or a cork board in this case, which is kind of neat because really if you want to do the frame kind of matchy-matchy all the way around, you could actually flip it over and just use it as a cork board the rest of the year, and then just flip it and use it as your fall sign during fall. All right, so we're gonna get started. I actually already peeled my little sticker off, so you should have a sticker on there. You can just peel that off. It might leave a little bit of like where it kind of tore up that a tiny bit, so I'm just gonna sand that just real quick so I can blow that off. Okay, but like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. There's some lettering even on here. You don't have to worry about that at all. We'll come and work on the frame sanding in just a minute. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the black background because we really want that to dry really well before we go on to the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and get my black. If you want to wear gloves, you feel free. All of this is like different kind of house paints or acrylic paints, so it will wash off. But if you don't want to do that, or if you have your nails done or something, then feel free to wear gloves. Okay, so on this step, we want to get a solid black background, but we don't want it to be thick, okay? So we want this to be just thin enough that it'll dry in just a few minutes, because we really need to get this dry for the stenciling step. We also don't need the black to touch the frame, okay? So we can get close to the frame. So as I start putting it on here, I'm gonna probably leave, I say that and then like my first one I get on the frame, So if you get it on the frame, it's not a big deal. We're gonna end up adding some blacks and some browns, and we're gonna sand down on the frames. We want it to kind of look like just different wood patterns. But as far as like where you need the black to actually make this sign, you only have to get close to the edge. So you can see I'm leaving probably about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch gap between my black and the frame. So that just kind of gives me one less thing that I have to kind of sand off of the frame in the end. So for now, you don't have to worry about that. We can, we're gonna add some black later to give it some more depth, but for now, we only need black to go where there's gonna be lettering or pictures, so we really don't need to go that close to the outside, okay? So I'm just gonna keep going around. I'm gonna start on the outside just because I'm actually gonna focus a little bit on not getting it all over the frame. If you get it on the frame, it's not a big deal. You're gonna end up getting the white on the frame because we're gonna really try to go close to the edge. And again, it's not a big deal. We'll kind of like wipe it off, we'll sand it off in the end, and then it looks fine because it's all kind of distressed, okay? I'm gonna work my way around. Basically, by the time I got back down here, this black already is like drying. So that's about how thin we want it to be, okay? So this black really soaks in to this backing. So don't feel like you have to put a ton on there. I don't want to see any like paint texture. So if yours is like real gloppy, or if you can really see where you put paint on there, then that's too thick, okay? So because we really, like I said, we want to get this to dry as quickly as we can. We won't necessarily be able to get it to dry all the way. We might have to wait just a little bit, especially while we make this little video. If you need to pause at all, if I get ahead of you, then feel free to pause. All right, so I'm almost done with all of my black. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, we're not going for perfection on this one. So I'm just gonna spread it out as best I can. I wanna get, you know, like I said, a good coverage. I can't really see my cork color anymore. And then I'm just gonna give it some time to dry. Okay, now this is gonna be, if you've never done a sign like this before, it's a little bit confusing. You might be like, I don't understand, there's supposed to be a white background, but this is what we call reverse stenciling. And I'm done with the black for now, so I'm gonna put a lid on it because I just know myself and I'm probably gonna spill it if I leave it out. Okay, so this is reverse stenciling, and with reverse stenciling, you actually paint the letter color first, and that way whenever you apply your stencil, it's actually just covering that background, and then we're gonna paint it all white, and then in the end, we're gonna peel up all that lettering, and when we peel up all of that lettering, you'll be able to see the black revealed, okay? So that makes it where we have a sign that doesn't have vinyl on it as our final product, it's just paint, but it makes it a little bit easier to place your stencil and make sure that it's straight and centered, okay? So I kind of found in the past that like if I did it the other way and you were just putting a whole sheet of stencil on there, it was really hard to tell if your lettering was gonna be crooked or straight until you got to the very end. And then if it was crooked, it was messed up. So with this one, with doing it like a reverse stencil, it gives you a chance to really see kind of where your stencil is going, and you can see if it's straight, okay? Now, I need to let this dry, but so you'll notice that this frame, a couple of things. One, it had keyholes on it. So because we're using the back of the cork board, it had places on here for you to hang it up on the wall. So we already filled those for you, so they should be pretty good. We're gonna try to flatten them out just a little bit with our sandpaper. And also you can feel that this frame is very slick, so it's not gonna pick up on the stain and the paint that we're gonna use on the frame is not gonna stick very well because it's too slick, okay? So we are actually gonna rough it up a little bit with our sandpaper to hopefully help the paint and the stain to stick a little bit, okay? So I'm just gonna go, and anytime I'm sanding, so I just gently went over these keyholes to try to make sure they were just kind of as flat as possible. So I'm kind of just using 2 fingers and just rubbing it. And I'm making sure I'm sanding in the direction of the wood grain, so just, of course, up and down on the long sides and then side to side on the short sides. So I'm just kind of going over those keyholes, making them as flat as they can. If they're not perfect, it's not a big deal. You're not going to see any of that in the end. But I'm going to kind of go around, stand up straight, and even this like outside edge, I'm just going to rough it up a little bit. It doesn't have to be sanded anything crazy. If you have little imperfections on your corners, you can knock those. And I'm just going to continue my way around. So I should be able to kind of see like little scratch marks on all of this, and all I'm doing is kind of taking off that, that shiny coat that's on here, and that'll just help all that stuff to stick, okay? I'm going to make my way around as I've got this stood up. And it doesn't take but a few minutes, so this should not be too hard. And again, if you want to do the corners and kind of, you know, make them a little bit smoother, then you feel free to do that. I didn't think about the fact that you might have not been able to see my face during that time. I might have been cut off, so sorry. I shouldn't be standing so you can see me. All right, so let me go around this edge all the way. And see, I even got a little black on my frame, but it's not a big deal. I promise in the end, you're gonna get a little bit of color all over the place. All right. So, I think I've got everything. Sometimes when I get talking, I kind of forget where I've gone and where I haven't. So, I'm gonna kind of blow this off. You might want to do that outside if you want to, if you're like doing it with a big group. Sometimes that sanding can get a little bit messy, but no big deal. Okay, so we're done with that. So I'm still kind of waiting for this to dry. I really want this background to be like dry, 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 because the drier it is, the better the stencil is going to stick. So even if that means like you're gonna take a break right now and everybody goes and gets a snack or whatever it takes, you really want this to be dry. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and do one of my coats of brown on the frame, and that'll give it, like I said, a little bit of a more chance to dry. I'm gonna open up this brown, get another one of my sponges. You don't really need a very big sponge for this. And I don't want this to be solid either. So I'm kind of dipping in my sponge, you can see, and then I am wiping it off, okay? This will not take a lot of stain. I'll not stand up this time in case you couldn't see my face. I'm just gonna go across, and it is really sticking well, which is awesome because we sanded it. So when I tried it the first time, it really wasn't sticking, so I knew we were gonna have to do that little step. I know you couldn't see that, so hold on, let me show you. So I'm just gonna dip, I wipe it off. I like to be able to see the sponge texture. If you see a lot of paint texture, it's just too much. So then I'm gonna rub on the front of this. Okay. Now I want it to be a little bit darker because I want it to match that keyhole so that I cover that up totally. Okay, awesome. I like the way that looks. So I'm gonna go on here, and then in the end, we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna layer a little bit of black on there, and we're also gonna sand it some to take off some of that, just take off some of the wood and take it back down to this light color. So I think that really helps give it some depth. Now I'm also I wanna kinda get this edge just a little bit. So I'm just lightly going in there. I'm not looking for perfect because there's really no way to avoid getting some of the white onto the frame. So I'm gonna end up sanding that edge anyway, but I don't want it to look like this perfectly fresh wood edge on here. So I'm gonna use my sponge to kind of and it's not wet at all. It's hardly has anything left. And I'm kind of just rubbing it in there, and you can kind of see I rubbed right along that edge, and I added just a little bit of brown color. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that all the way around. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. I don't want it to be look like it's just solid painted, especially on that inside edge, because it's gonna have imperfections. It's gonna get black on it, it's gonna get white on it as we keep going, okay? So I'm just gonna use this. I haven't dipped it again. There's not a lot of stain on there, but there we go. I got that part done. Now I'm gonna keep going around, and I need to get the outside edge of the frame and the inside edge. So for my inside edge, I did it pretty dark, and I did that because I really wanted to blend that keyhole. So it's not gonna, of course, it's not gonna stain the same as anywhere else because it's wood filler and not real wood. So I just kind of want to make that a little bit thick so I can cover up that a little bit. But when I did the outside edge, I really just did it kind of lightly, a little bit thinner than I did on the front edge, and I'll show you that. So you can see, so this is I have a little bit more grain showing, the top is a little bit darker. It's all just preference, you do it how you like it. All right, and so I have it dipped again. I'm gonna go ahead and do this other outside edge because I don't want it to be crazy thick. All right, and then I'm gonna dip and wipe it off. And that gives me a thicker amount to do on the front, okay? So as you're staining, just make sure that you're staining with the wood grain. So for the frame, that just means go in the direction of the frame, okay? We just want that because we're kind of trying to give that impression of stained wood as we do this project. So, all right, so I'm gonna dip one more time. I'm gonna get a thicker coat on the front, and that really just blends those keyholes in. It's almost just as thick as paint on here. And so I really, on the sides that really had the keyholes on it, I literally just did it one thick across there. And when I did that, you can't see the keyhole at all. So I'm impressed with that. All right, I'm already back to my first edge that I started with, and it's already dry. So especially those outside edges that you're not putting a ton of stain on, they are just absorbing and drying right away. Okay, so I got that all done. So you can see we've got the black on the inside, and we've got the brown on the outside. Okay, so, and like I said, not all of this little brown lip on the inside is perfect. I don't want it to be. It's not going to be. By the end, I just kind of touched it a little bit with the brown so that it doesn't look too perfect, because that light wood that we start with is very perfect looking. So we want to kind of get rid of that perfection a little bit. Okay, so I'm kind of going back, seeing if I kind of like the way everything looks. I've got a little bit of spot over here that's way too thick. So I'm going to rub that just a little bit. I can see. All right, so mine is getting dry. Okay, so now I'm feeling my board and I'm pretty confident that it's pretty dry. Okay, so now I'm going to start working on my stencils. These stencils hopefully will not give you a terribly hard time. So let's see if we can get these put on there pretty well. All right, I'm gonna flip this because I feel like if I stand up, you may not be able to see me quite as well. So you might be upside down, so I'm sorry that this part you'll have to like see it upside down for just a second. But I think if you just follow along, you'll be just fine. Okay, so we have two different stencils, okay, because the sign is pretty big. So, oh, let me follow my own advice. I'm gonna put my lid back on my stain so that I don't spill it everywhere. I'll set my sponge on top of that in case I need it later, okay? All right, so we're gonna start with the one that has the truck, okay? So actually you'll end up with 3 stencils because we're gonna cut off this little pumpkin. We don't need that till the very end, okay? All right, and then I'm gonna start with my stencil that has the truck on it, okay? And our goal for this one, I'm just gonna rub it a little bit on here. Since I'm dry, I'm okay with working here. Of course, you can just work on your table, but I'm trying to stay in the line of the camera. I'm just gonna use my card. I'm just gonna kind of rub this. And what this is doing is I'm trying to get the clear stuff to stick to the white vinyl. That's transfer tape. So what it does is it's gonna transfer this white vinyl onto my sign, okay? So I'm just kind of scraping it on here. Mine's a little bit long, and so like I see when I'm laying this clear on here that it's kind of overlapping my frame. I'm actually going to trim it off. All you need is the white, so if you want to trim around your white and kind of get this little excess off of here, I just want to make it where it'll fit on here so that when I go to place my stencil, that clear transfer paper isn't like getting in my way. So I kind of just trimmed some off and made it where it's like just the white wording, okay? So I'm just scraping. I think the stencil should be pretty good. So my goal is to get this clear to pick up all of the white. Okay, so now I'm going to start separating. And I want to make sure that when I separate, all of that white comes with me. So you can see when I started going, this part of the truck came off really easily, but this part left a little spot on there. So if you ever have a spot that doesn't come off, you just pinch it from the front and the back, and you just keep going, and that should get your letters going. Sometimes that happens with these little letters. So one thing you could do is just scrape that letter again. So maybe I wasn't as aggressive as I should have been on these letters. So I'm going to scrape them one more time. But if it doesn't work, so if I keep going and it still doesn't come up, see, it worked really good. I also like to peel at a diagonal. I kind of feel like that picks up the stencil. So one of my tires didn't come up. I'm just going to peel it and keep going. But I do like to peel at a diagonal. I feel like that picks up letters better. But if I have any letters that don't want to come, if they want to be difficult, then I'm simply going to pinch them on the front and the back. So I just use my fingers on the front and the back. This becomes trash. So we can set that aside. So your goal is to end up with this clear paper that has your white stencil on it. Okay? Now, important step. Okay? So on this part, we want to make sure that we're 2 things. We are centered on the frame and that we are straight on the frame, okay? So when we go to put this down, you want to just really pay attention that you're as centered as you can and as straight as you can, okay? You're going to have wiggle room once you get it on here, but I also want the stencil to stick, and I'm afraid that if you move it too much, it's going to pick up a lot of that dust and grime that you have on here, and I don't want you to have a hard time. So I'm going to set this on here. And I just want to look at my letters. So don't get confused and look at your clear stuff. Just look at your lettering, okay? So I'm looking at my lettering and I'm making sure that the words hay rides and corn maze are like equidistant from the bottom. So I'm trying to get as straight as I can. And I also want to make sure that the A in apple and the R in cider are the same distance from the frame. So I did about 1/2 inch spacing all the way around. So as long as I think it looks good and nice and straight, I'm going to commit, okay? So I let go of my stencil. First, I'm just going to kind of start in the middle, and I'm going to push out. I'm going to try to get all that to stick. And you know what? Again, what's kind of great about it being a distressed sign is that if it's not perfectly straight, No one's gonna be able to tell, okay? So we go for as best as we can, but even if we're a little bit off, that's okay. All right, so now I have it on here, so then I'm gonna scrape this down really good, so I wanna get that clear transfer paper off. So hopefully, if our sign was nice and dry, this should stick on here pretty well. If not, we'll have to convince it to stick a little bit, but hopefully not too much, okay? So now that I've scraped it, I'm gonna start peeling off. Oh, yay. Okay, so the truck stuck very well. I guess the true test comes when we get to the letters, okay? So these little letters down here, I like to pull parallel to the surface, okay? So I'm pulling just like this, and I always pull at an angle. I don't know why. Okay, see, my little B started coming up, so it didn't stick down very well. So I'm just gonna use my finger, I'm gonna hold that corner of that B in place, and I'm just gonna go slowly. If I need to go back and re-scrape this part that I haven't peeled off, that's totally fine. So you can do that as you keep going, but just go slowly. The worst thing you want to do is like rip a letter in half or something because you're just trying to go too quickly. So just go slow, and if you have any letter that doesn't, that wants to kind of peel up, so my little lower row might have been a little bit wetter than the rest of it, so it's kind of being a little bit ornery. Once you get it off of this clear stuff, I feel like it sticks a lot better, but sometimes getting this clear stuff off is hard. You kind of get it one way or the other. Either the stencil's gonna be really easy to get to stick to the transfer paper, or it's very easy to get to stick to your surface, okay? So in the case of this sign, it was super easy for us to peel that transfer paper and pick up all of this vinyl, but transferring it is a tiny bit harder. It's really not bad. As long as your sign was dry, I think you're gonna be perfectly fine with this step. But if it was a little bit wet, you might have a little bit of a harder time. But once it's off of this transfer tape, which is now trashed, by the way, once it's off of that transfer tape, it seems like it's sticking just great onto here, okay? So no stress. All right, let me get a drink. So I know you're upside down, so here's what it looks like so far. Right side up. So looking really good. Okay, so now our next step is going to be our other sign, our other part that says Farmer's Market. Now kind of the same thing. I'm going to trim around it. I kind of want the least amount of that clear stuff to be in my way as possible, okay? So I've trimmed a little bit off, and now I'm ready to put this on the top part of this sign. So again, I'm just going to scrape it down, get that to stick, okay? So once I've got that, I'm just going to peel up. Oh, so my F didn't want to start going, so I'm just going to pinch that corner and get it going. I always like it when it messes up because I can kind of show you that even mine mess up too. Okay, so if those letters are just going to be ornery, like mine are being ornery, just keep wiggling, go back and pinch. I feel like once you get a corner of a letter going, you got to just keep peeling that one and it should come up, okay? But like I said, look, even mine is not always working. So the corner of that R didn't want to come up, and that's okay. So I could lay it down and scrape it again, but I feel like it's just as fast to sit here and kind of just pinch the beginning of these letters. All right, and this is, like I said, this is actually fairly easy to get off compared to sometimes we have stencils that are really stubborn. Okay, so I got my blue stuff off. I ended up with my Farmer's Market. If it takes you longer than that, it's totally fine. Just pause it and go slow and take your time just so you don't rip up this stencil, okay? And I've been doing this for many years, and I've done thousands of these stencils, so if I make it look too easy, that's why. It's not because you're doing anything wrong, it's just I've been doing it for a long time. All right, so now it's time to get this one up at the top. So kind of the same thing, I'm just gonna make sure I have it centered where I like it. I wanna make sure that it's as straight as I can. So this one's a little bit harder, I think, because you don't really have a straight edge like you did at the bottom. But what I'm kind of looking at is that the word market really lines up with the flat part of the truck. So I'm making sure, and I want to make sure the spacing from the sides is good. Okay, so I'm actually going to flip this so I can work on this side so you can see it too. All right, so now I've got this where I wanted it. I pushed it with my hands nice and gently, but now I'm going to rough it up and scrape it down. So take out all of your frustration on here. All right. So scrape all of that down. When you feel like you've done a good job with that, just start peeling at the corner. So even though these letters were giving me a little bit of a hard time, now this step is proving to be easier on this one. I guess maybe because the letters are bigger, so they have a little bit more surface to stick on, and this part of the sign got to dry longer. So the drier your sign is, the easier this is going to be to stick on. Okay? All right, so now I'm done with getting my stencils on. So now I'm ready to apply my white. Okay, so the white is going to be your background color. Now with this one, we are going to get closer to the edge, so you might get some on your frame. I am going to kind of, if I get it on the front of the frame, I'm going to wipe it a little bit. I wouldn't go too crazy with that or stress too much about that, because like I said, we're going to sand that. I kind of like the way that the edges look like a little bit rough and you can still see a little bit of that brown. So you just do it how you want to do it, okay? But I'm going to dip in the white and then I'm going to wipe off. Now the other thing I'm going to do a little bit different on this one is a couple things to keep in mind. Just be gentle on your stencil, okay? So especially if like on these little letters where you had a little bit of a hard time getting them to stick, I don't want you like really scrubbing on this board because you're gonna rip up the stencils, okay? And we don't wanna do that at this point. So I'm just gonna dip. The other thing, and I'm gonna wipe off, and I wanna see kind of sponge texture, so not any drippy paint. The other thing is I'm gonna actually start in the middle, like where the truck is, and the reasoning is I want that to dry because that's where my pumpkins are gonna go, okay? So I need to do another layer of stencils for that. Now I am doing on this particular sign, just because I like the way that it looks, I am kind of rubbing. Usually we kind of spout and we stay like very neat, but on this one, I don't want it to look that way. I want some areas to be darker than other areas. I want it to have that real streaky look because then I want it to look more old and that kind of a thing, okay? So you can see I did my little truck area first. Now, once I'm done with that, you can do anything else. I'm gonna work my way around the edge kind of like I did the first time, just because I feel like it's the only place I have to kind of think about. Everything else is just like filling it in. So I'm gonna go kind of close to the edge, and if I get it on the inside of that frame lip, that's totally fine. I got some on the front. I am gonna kind of wipe that just a little bit so it's not like clumpy on there, but if it's on the frame, it's totally fine. We're gonna be sanding the frame in just a minute. But I kind of just wipe it down just so it's not like wet and thick, because we're going to sand that, like I said, pretty soon. Other than the frame, like the outside edge, I am going to try, if I can use my corner to kind of get in there as much as I can, I am going to try to stick with the up and down pattern. So for this like top edge, I am going to go across the edge kind of using a sharp edge of my sponge. But once I'm done with that, I'm actually going to go back. I'll show you. So I am like breaking my rule by wiping side to side on the top part, but you'll see in just a second how I'm going to fix that, okay? So I'm going to wipe this off, and then once I start coming back down, let me get in that corner with my sharp edge. Okay, so now that I'm done with this whole top edge, I'm actually going to go back and pull it down. So I'm pulling that paint down because I want it to look like everything is streaky up and down, up and down, up and down, okay? So at least it's good because like I said, this one is not perfect, it's okay. So even though I am really like scrubbing this sign with paint, I am also still being very gentle, okay? When I did this the first time, I really did rip up part of my truck, which again, if you're going for it not being perfect, is totally fine. But I just don't want you to accidentally rip off like a whole word or something like that. So if you get under a stencil, that's okay. Just be a little bit more gentle. I'm gonna continue my way around the edge. All right, and these now, and you'll kind of get a feel for it too, because you'll be able to tell how well your letters are really sticking. So on this one, my letters are sticking really, really well. So I'm not too stressed about my rubbing up and down. But if you notice that one of your areas is not working or it's not sticking very well, then just be careful. You can also start on the stencil and work your way out. So I don't want it to look perfect, and I noticed my little truck part that I started with was a little more perfect than I like, so I went back and just rubbed a little bit more there, but that'll still give it plenty of time to dry. All right, so as I go around, I can see, like, you can tell like, my frame is not perfect. There's white that's getting on the frame and stuff, totally fine, okay? We want to have like that totally different, like We want layers of light wood, dark wood, white paint, black paint, brown paint, it doesn't matter, okay? So I am gonna keep going my way around. So same thing with this bottom edge. So like I said, I'm using kind of like where I have a 90-degree angle on my sponge to really get into these corners. And I'm gonna work my way around, but once I'm done with this flat edge on the bottom, I'm gonna stretch it back up so it looks like I did it all in the same direction. So I've got this one spot that I kind of go left to right, but then I'm gonna go back and correct it, okay? So once I get to this other corner, as best I can, now I'm gonna use a little bit more paint, rub it off, and I'm gonna pull that this way, okay? So I'm kind of pulling that line so that I don't have any like distinct left to right lines. I want everything to look like kind of up and down, okay? I like the way that it's looking. I like that it's not perfect. I like that some of the white is touching the edge. If I get it on the front, I don't want a ton on the very front, so I'm kind of just wiping that and putting it black on my black if I have to. But everybody's is going to be different, and that's okay. And it's okay for it not to look perfect because I want it to look like it's an old sign, okay? All right, so now, whoop, I almost spilled my wine. So now what I see is what I get. So what I mean by that is this is what your final product is gonna look like. So if you don't like it, or if you think it's too perfect or too imperfect, or if you wanna add some depth to it, now is the time to do that, okay? So you could be totally done at this point. I mean, I think it actually looks really good. So let me show you. Try not to get white on my frame. Let me show you so far. I think it's looking really good. But if you want to get creative or add a little bit of depth to it, one thing you could do is, like, here's my brown sponge that I used earlier for the frame. It's not wet anymore, it's pretty much dry, but I'm gonna lightly pull it on here and see if I like adding a little bit of color to my white. So this is just kind of making it look a little bit dirty. You totally don't have to do this. You might start doing it and regret it, and you can always touch it back up with a little bit of white if you want to. I'm very, very lightly doing this. I'm not doing anything like crazy. I just kind of thought I did it a little bit thick, so I needed some imperfection in my sign. So I'm just rubbing, staying in the same direction, up and down. So that's one option of something you can do. We'll kind of do the same thing on the frame here in a little bit. Okay, so I just did it very, very lightly. You might not even be able to see it very well, but you can see I added just a little bit of brown. So now I'm actually going to go back to my sandpaper, and so as this is drying, before I peel it off, or actually before I do my pumpkins, really, that's going to be my next step, I'm going to go and distress my frame some. So I'm going to go always with the grain, so left to right or up and down on the sides. And I want to kind of get this inside lip, and I want to get the outside lip. So I'm just trying to, and it's peeling off real good. It's sanding really good. So just be gentle and just barely sanding that. We just, like I said, want to make it look old. We want to make it look not perfect. That'll help cover up any mistakes that you've made. None of it's a mistake, right? Like I always say, just say you did it on purpose. And so I think this will just help it really get that that look like it was made in a store and not made by you, which is pretty cool, I think. All right, so I like to get on the corners, just work my way around. I'm not doing a ton, but if I had, like on this part, I had some white paint that's on here. I'm not a big fan of like a chunk of white paint, so I'm just sanding right along that, sanding on the edges. I'm not sanding really where those keyholes are because I really want that to stay dark, and mine are totally hidden, so as long as you sanded those pretty flat, you shouldn't be able to see any of that. They're all covered. All right, so I'm doing a little bit on my inside edge and a little bit on my outside edge. You can rotate your sandpaper if you need to. And I love the way it's looking. Like some of it's peeling off like a little chunk, and you're revealing that, and some of it's not. I think it looks really good. Okay. So now I'm done with that. I got kind of dusty on that one. All right, So kind of blow that off a little bit so you can kind of see how the frame, you know, like I said, it reveals some spots a lot, it reveals some other spots just a little bit, but it really just helps to blend everything. Okay, so now it's actually time to, let's paint the pumpkins. I was gonna say we should peel up, but we could go ahead and do the pumpkins. Either way, everything on mine is pretty dry, but we have this last stencil that we're gonna do, and we're gonna apply that, and we're gonna do our orange for our pumpkins, okay? So let me go ahead and peel that off, just like we did our other stencil, so get that. Now, when I go to place this on here, I want there to be a tiny little gap between the bed of the truck and where your pumpkins go, okay? So as I'm looking to place this on my sign, I'm kind of just watching and making sure it's right above where the truck bed is. Okay, so you can kind of see through the pumpkins and then place that on there, okay? So I got that on there. Now with these pumpkins, if you want to just do them solid orange, that's totally fine. If you want to be creative and add a little depth, you can do that too. So this one is stuck on there really good because I knew my sign was pretty dry at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and get my little sponge and my orange. It's kind of crazy that I gave you these big containers because I feel like we've used like 1/10 of our paint, but that's okay. I'm always like afraid you might run out at home, so it's kind of something I'm still getting used to. All right, so for the orange, like you're gonna barely use any, so that's why I was saying that. Okay, so for the orange, again, I dipped it. Now for this one, we're gonna do dabbing like we usually do, but that'll be totally fine because these pumpkins are so small. So I'm just gonna dab like this all the way across and get these little pumpkins to be orange. All right, now for this one, I'm gonna leave the stems blank because I'm actually gonna go do the stems in my darker color, probably my brown, just to make them look a little bit more realistic. All right, so I've got my orange done. If you wanna do it all in orange, if you're just like simple and done, you're totally fine, you can do that. My brown is not quite like it's really dry because I was just barely putting it on there, but I'm gonna open this up, get a teeny tiny bit of brown, and I'm actually gonna put brown on my stems. I just felt like being creative like that today, so you can just use a little corner of your sponge and put a little bit of brown so you have some different color stems on there if you want. All right, my fingers are getting a little bit caked up. Okay, so last step is you'll actually have a needle, like a safety pin in your kit. I forgot to grab mine, so let me grab my little poker. All right, so you can use anything that you have. This is my favorite, it's actually a seam puller. But I'm just gonna try to get up under these stencils and peel them off. So usually when we peel these off, I'm like nice and gentle. I wanna make sure I'm not ripping anything. With this one, I'm not. So I'm being kind of like quick and rough on purpose because I really like the way that sometimes it'll peel up some of the backing and it'll reveal some of that brown. So if it does that, that's what we want, okay? So don't freak out. Sometimes when we're making like perfect signs, you're like, oh no, it took up the backing, but this is actually perfect because it's making it look super old, which is awesome. I'm gonna skip the truck for right now because I want that pumpkin to dry a little bit. I'm just gonna go down here. You got tons of letters to work on. So I'm just barely going under each little sticker and peeling it up. Again, if you go a little bit slower than me, that's totally fine. I've been doing this a very long time and I want to get done for the sake of the video. I think we were cracking up because this was supposed to be like the easy party because I'm about to have a baby, and it turns out it took us a lot of prep to get these ready. Usually whenever we have like public parties or we can do it in person, y'all can really help me with all of this stencil work. So this stencil work is a ton. You see all these tiny letters and we had to peel out everything and put the transfer paper on and all of that. So I'm grateful that we posted this one a little bit earlier this time. Usually we only do like a week in advance, and this one we did 2 weeks since we were having a private party too. It was hosting a little bit of in-person. So I'm glad that we had more time to prep because we spent a lot of time on these stencils. So at least if you're new too, you didn't have to do any of the hard work of the stencils. We did all that for you. Usually you have to peel up all the insides and everything. So, all right, so let me go back for my truck. Even though my pumpkin sticker is on top of my truck, it's not a big deal. It'll all just peel up at the same time. Get my truck, and I'll kind of grab that pumpkin sticker at the same time. Ta-da! Yay! All right, I got a little bit more peeled up around my pumpkins than I really wanted, so I'm gonna barely touch it up just a tiny bit with my white, so it doesn't quite look like we used a stencil around the pumpkins, because you can kind of see my square. But since it's all imperfect, it's okay if you touch it up just a little bit around there. I mean, I can barely tell, but just for kicks and giggles, you know, if you want to do that and touch it up a little bit, if you have an issue with it pulling up a little bit more around that area. And part of that's probably just because I'm in a hurry, so I did it a little bit quick after we did the first one. But as long as you just touch it up a tiny bit, don't try to be perfect, because like I said, you won't be able to tell in the end. But I'm just going to touch up a little bit, use my fingers to kind of rub in that little area just a bit around these pumpkins. All right, anything else that I see? So I can use a sharp edge on my sponge if I need to touch up anything that's like small. So if anything hops out at you and you're like, oh, I don't like the way that looks, then feel free to touch it up just a little bit. But don't try to be perfect, because this sign is not meant to be perfect. All right, so now I got a tiny bit of my orange I'm gonna touch up, so I can just use the corner of my sponge and touch that up, and ta-da! Oh, I gotta stick a letter that was on there. All right, check it out. I think you're done. I think it looks awesome. You did such a great job. And like I said, if you have any problems, or if anything doesn't work, or if you mess up a stencil, don't worry about it. Just let me know, and I'll help you fix anything that you need. But our goal here was not perfection. It was a rustic. That's really the feel of fall, right? So I hope you enjoy your sign, and thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you will join us again next month as we, can you believe it, like start to get ready for the holidays. I'm so excited. Thank you so much, and have a good night.